My dad started working for the same company in 1968. Worked his way up from store manager to district manager by 1975, which was a big deal. Big enough that we packed up and moved the whole family from San Jose, California up to the Seattle area. He ran the top district in his company for most of his career. Then right around the time I graduated, his company got acquired. They demoted him, district manager back to store manager in the mid-90s. His retirement was a fraction of what it should have been after everything he'd put in. He never complained and he was fine, but I was watching. And what I saw told me everything I needed to know about how much a company actually values you. I wanted to tell you why I'm making this video because it's not just about the past. What happened to my dad's generation and then to mine is happening again right now on a much bigger scale. AI is replacing jobs across entire industries. Our kids, our nieces, and nephews are graduating into a job market that makes the early 90s look manageable by comparison. The gig economy isn't a trend anymore. For the next generation, working 3 or 4 things simultaneously just to pay the bills isn't going to be unusual, it's going to be the baseline. Gen X was the first generation to get a real taste of this. We were the canary in the coal mine. We learned the hard way that loyalty to one company is a bad bet, and that betting your entire financial future on a single institution is a losing strategy. That lesson took us decades to absorb. But the generations coming up behind us, they don't have that kind of time. So this isn't just a Gen X story, it's a preview of what work looks like going forward, and we happen to be the generation that figured it out first. So let's back up. To understand how Gen X operates at work, you have to understand what we walked into when we got there. The boomers and silent generation, our parents, grew up in a genuine era of job security. You joined a company in your 20s, worked your way up, and if you kept your head down and did your job, the company kept its end of the deal. Pension, benefits, stability. The whole thing functioned like a contract, and for decades, both sides honored it. Gen X arrived expecting a version of that. We graduated high school and college through the mid-80s into the early 90s, and the economy looked fine at first. Corporate America was doing well, the suits were shiny. Then the downsizing wave came. IBM, one of the most iconic employers in American history, laid off 60,000 people between 1991 and 1993. AT&T cut 40,000 jobs in 1996, while simultaneously posting record profits. That second part is the part that matters. These weren't companies in crisis, they were profitable. They were just done with the people who built them. Gen X watched this in real time, sometimes from inside those buildings. And the lesson was impossible to miss. The contract was fiction. There was no deal. Loyalty ran one direction and one direction only. I felt this personally. My dad had told me the path. Go to college, get a degree, and you'll get hired right out of school. So I went. I started in pre-engineering and realized pretty quickly that that wasn't it, and ended up graduating with a psychology degree from the University of Washington. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. It was a lot of pressure to choose a major at 18 when you just don't know what to do with your life. Some people knew exactly, I just didn't. But my dad just reassured me, hey, just get a degree and you'll be fine. Because when he graduated in the early 60s, if you had a degree, you were set. Didn't really matter what the degree was. So I graduated in the early 90s right into one of the worst job markets in recent memory. And here's what we really weren't ready for. We weren't just competing with each other. We were competing with experienced workers who had just been laid off by the same companies doing the downsizing. People with 10 to 15 years experience in the job market were suddenly unemployed, and they were taking the jobs that probably should have went to us. A fresh college grad with a psychology degree wasn't exactly the first in line. It was brutal. So most of us landed wherever we could. For me, that meant retail management. I managed a clothing store called Structure for several years in the mall. You might be familiar with it. Then a furniture store, then a suit store. Good jobs with okay pay, but none of it felt like where I was supposed to be. I had a degree and I had ambitions, and I spent most of my late 20s feeling like I was running in place, waiting for something to open up that never quite did. I wasn't alone in that either. I went to school with a lot of guys who had their heads on straight, they knew what they wanted, they worked hard, and most of them ended up in similar situations. Underemployed, doing jobs that paid the bills, and just, quietly disappointed. This is a thing that gets constantly misread about our generation. I remember back then we were called the slacker generation, and journalists spent decades writing about it, and none of that came from laziness. We were the first generation to clearly see that working yourself to exhaustion for a company that would drop you the second numbers dropped was plainly a bad investment. That's not slacking, that's just pattern recognition. So we adjusted, built portable skills instead of betting everything on one employer. And then 2008 happened. The timing was brutal. By the mid-2000s, the oldest Gen Xers were hitting their peak earning years. Finally past the entry-level grind, building real savings, climbing towards senior leadership, this was supposed to be the accumulation phase of the plan. The Great Recession wiped out roughly 38% of median Gen X net worth. And here's what separates us from the previous generations. We were the first generation to spend our entire careers under the 401k system. No pensions or guaranteed monthly checks waiting for us at the end. Just a defined contribution plan where you put in what you can, the market does what it does, and the risk sits entirely on you. Corporate America shifted that risk from the institution onto the individual right around the same time it stopped pretending that loyalty meant anything. Those two moves happened together and most people didn't notice until it was already done. The median savings for Gen Xers right now sits around $107,000. And the amount most people say this generation needs to retire comfortably? Closer to $1.57 million. So most of us have less than 10% of what we need to retire. And about 77% of Gen Xers don't believe Social Security will be there when they need it. I actually think that most of us think about retirement differently than our parents did as well. I don't really plan on retiring all the way ever. I always want to do something to give purpose in my life, even if it's like a side gig or just a part-time deal. But it may not even be an option for most of us if we only have 10% saved. And some of us are both supporting our kids as well as our parents at the same time. So that's kind of wearing on us a little bit. So Gen X, no, we're not a slacker generation. We're a generation that got handed one of the worst sequences of financial timing in modern American history, and we're still dealing with it. So what do you do with all this information? You've watched the company betray your parents. You've watched your savings crater away in 2008. The corporate ladder doesn't really exist. What's the next move? A lot of Gen X is walking out. Not dramatically, more like a quiet, calculated exit, taking on side gigs and just trying to work your way out of the system. Part of this, I think, is just wired into who we are as Gen X. Gen X, we have a little bit of rebel in us. We have a risk tolerance that generations around us don't quite share. My dad's from the silent generation, and I was the exact opposite as him. We were the kids sneaking out late at night to TP houses, going to keg parties in the woods we absolutely were not supposed to be at. There's something in our blood that has always had a harder time sitting still, following the script, and waiting our turn for 40 years. The corporate structure just was never a perfect fit for our generation that grew up testing boundaries the moment nobody was watching. So when the corporations broke the deal, a lot of us didn't grieve it for very long. We just started looking for the exit. I wanted to tell you how I got out of the system because I think it's more common than people realize. My final job, when I was managing a suit store, I started noticing something. Guys who lifted weights got too bulky and they genuinely had a hard time looking good in dress clothes. I've been into fitness since high school and I knew what I was looking at and started writing about it. A blog aimed at the lean Hollywood look, how to train and still fit into a suit. I started a blog called Fitness Black Book. It's not around anymore, but it started a career for me. It found an audience, it went viral, and within 2 years I was earning more from the blog than I was from managing a suit store. I was able to quit retail and do writing full-time. No boss or quarterly review, no waiting for the person above me to retire before anything changed. That's the thing that drove me most nuts about working for a corporation. In a corporate structure, your income is largely determined by someone else's timeline. If the person above you stays for another 10 years, you're kind of screwed. But if you're lucky enough to get promoted and then the person above you within a year moves on or gets promoted themselves, then you can climb the corporate ladder. It kind of sucks. You can be excellent at your job and still be stuck waiting for the person above you to leave before anything opens up. In your own business, there's no ceiling. Your effort has a direct relationship to your outcome. So I'm really just against the way that the corporate ladder is set up. I'm just too impatient for that. You only live once. And my only friends with true long-term job security work for the city, the state, or they are teachers and principals. The teachers thing sounds counterintuitive because you always hear teachers aren't paid enough, but when you factor in the pension and the benefits, the total picture is genuinely strong. Same with the trades. I don't have kids, but if I did, I would probably steer them towards trades if that was something they were interested in. I have a friend who installs sprinkler systems into commercial buildings and does extremely well. I have friends who are electricians and they didn't go to college and they out-earned all of us in their 20s and 30s. With some of us caught up, but wow, that's not a bad route to go. But what the entrepreneurial path shares is that none of it depends on a corporation deciding on your worth. And the numbers back that up. Gen X makes up between 47 and 49% of all entrepreneurs in the United States. More than boomers, more than millennials, more than any other generation. We're smaller in number, but we make up close to half of all entrepreneurs. For a generation that got labeled disengaged and checked out, we turned out to be the most likely to go build something, and I'm proud of that. The one thing that stops most people from making this kind of move is going it alone. Inside a corporation, you have a team, systems, and support. When you walk out, you're one person trying to cover what a whole department used to handle. AI has changed that pretty significantly. Tools that didn't exist 10 years ago let a single person operate at scale that used to require a staff. Gen X has taken to this naturally. We're already wired to figure things out without waiting for someone to hand us the answers. That's just how we grew up as latchkey kids. And that brings me back to why I made this video. What Gen X went through, graduating into a bad job market, watching companies break the loyalty deal, learning to build something on our own, that's not just our story anymore. AI is replacing jobs across entire industries right now. The younger generation, our kids, our nieces and nephews, our grandkids if we're old enough, are facing a job market that makes the early 90s look stable. The gig economy isn't a side hustle for the next generation. For a lot of younger workers, 3 or 4 income streams running at once is just how the bills get paid. As Gen X, we were the first to feel this. We figured it out the hard way. The generations behind us are going to have to figure it out faster with higher stakes. The entrepreneurial mindset we built out of necessity, that's not a Gen X thing anymore. It's just the thing. My dad's generation trusted the institutions to handle the future. Gen X learned to handle it themselves, and turned out that was the right call. We were the kids who came home to an empty house and figured it out, made dinner, did homework, and locked the door. Nobody was coming to check on us, and we knew it. We also quietly figured out that the corporate deal was broken, stopped waiting for someone to fix it, and built something on our own terms. Corporate America is still trying to figure out why nobody trusts them anymore. Gen X could have told them. We've known since the 90s.